everyone, happy to have you here with me once again. Welcome back. Today, as you can see in the title, we're having the second part for the video of ranking my whole eyeshadow palette collection, and I'm super excited. In the first video I talked about my list 23 favorite eyeshadow palettes, and today we're going to be talking about the top 20, and I cannot wait. I feel like all of the palettes that I have here with me right now are favorites in my collection, some more than others of course. But yeah, all the palettes that I'm going to be mentioning in this video, in this part, are palettes that I really enjoy, and I'll try not to get into the oh, it's a really nice palette, or I'm glad to have this palette. I'm trying to get more into detail why I like a palette more than others. In case you haven't seen the first part yet, I'll leave it down in the description box and in the cards over here. But yeah, what I explained in the first part is that since for me it will be impossible to rank 43 eyeshadow palettes in my collection, I decided to do what Sarah Rose did in her ranking of July of last year, I think, and I created a point system, and I was like, how do you say it, like scoring for items from 1 to 5. It was color story, formula, inspiration, and packaging, and summing those 4 factors, I got like the final like point system, and that way I was able to rank my palettes. But yeah, I don't want to make this introduction any longer because it's going to be a long video, so let's start with my favorite palettes. Okay, I'll move to the side so you can see like the score screen over here, but let's start with place number 20, and there I have my Making Mobs palette. The first time I saw this palette, I wasn't really interested on it, but to be honest, it's a palette in my collection that I really enjoy, especially in winter. If you have never seen the palette, it looks like this. The thing with this palette, and the reason why this is not even higher, is because I feel like this palette, it's a little bit too monochromatic, and in like the color story segment, I decided to take a whole point out of this palette because the shades Solitaire and Tongue Tied are basically the same. The only difference is that this one is a complete matte and this one is a matte with glitter on it or shimmer on it, but they both work the same, they look the same on the eyes, and even the description of the shades is exactly the same. And that to happen in a 9-pan eyeshadow palette is not something that I can forgive, to say it on a way. Okay, in plate number 19, I have my Naughty palette from Huda Beauty. This is a palette that, to be honest, I wouldn't have purchased, but Huda Beauty back in September or August had like a sale where if you purchase an 18-pan palette, you got a free Mercury Retrograde, and this was the palette that called my attention the most besides Mercury Retrograde, so I decided to go with it. And also, I don't know, I feel like I really like the name of the palette and the idea of it. But this palette is not higher, even if the formula it's really good, because this is a pretty red leaning palette, and reds are not my favorite colors. I feel like I have a lot to play around with it in this palette because yeah, it's more red leaning and that's not something that I love, but you have a lot of variety. You have some golden, some neutrals, and something that I like in this palette is that the mattes in the pan look pretty much the same what you will get in your eyes, and I feel like in some Huda Beauty palettes the mattes in the pan look one way, but when you apply it look like a complete different color. So yeah, it's a really nice palette. I really like it. I'm really happy to have it on my collection, but it's not my color story, and that's the reason why it's not even higher. In number 18, we have a palette that I was so excited about, but now that I have it, I'm underwhelmed by it, and that is my Sigma Enchanted palette. I heard Kelly Bush talking so much about this palette back in 2019. I was really excited about this one. It was really hard for me to get it because Sigma is not available in my country, but now that I have it, I feel like it's kind of meh. I was waiting way more out of this palette, but let me tell you, the color story, it's amazing. Every time that I look at it, I feel like it's an enchanted forest full of fairy tales and that kind of stuff. I really love this color story, but it doesn't really work that well for me. I think one of my bigger issues with this palette is that I feel like I'm missing transition shades. The only color that I could wear as a transition is Innocent, this shade over here, and it's a pink. I'm missing, I don't know, a brown, a mid-tone brown, something like that in this palette. The shimmers are pretty, some of them are really amazing. I will say that my favorite is Plum, which is surprising because I was hoping Metamorphosis to be my favorite one. But yeah, it's a really beautiful palette. I'm glad that I have it, but I was hoping that this one was going to be a favorite, and it's not. So yeah. Okay, in number 17, it's one of the palettes that I'm using today. It's a pink palette, a monochromatic pink palette, but I will say this is my favorite pink palette in my whole collection. It's a Cloud Spoon from Colourpop, and this one, as I said, it's a monochromatic pink palette. If you don't like pinks, I wouldn't recommend it, but I feel like this is a pretty complete eyeshadow palettes for being a pink monochromatic palette, because you have a good array of colors, like different shades of pink, from a really hot pink to something way more wearable. You have some shimmers, maybe you could have more variety on the shimmers. You have a super chalk shadow that is kind of a duochrome and iridescent shade that is really beautiful. But can you see it from there? It has a glitter, and for that reason this palette lose a whole point, because yeah, I didn't need it, but I really like this palette, and since I saw it for the first time, I knew that I need it, and I don't regret it at all. In number 16, I have, I think it's the first palette that I purchased back in 2021, and that is my The Child palette from Colourpop. This palette, if I'm completely honest, the reason why I wanted this palette, it's because back in summer of 2021, I saw The Mandalorian, the TV show, and I was obsessed with Baby Yoda. And even if I know that I don't use greens that often, I felt like I needed this palette. I needed this palette in my collection. And even if this is not one of my favorite palettes, I'm really happy that I have it, because even if it's a green palette, I feel like it's more of a wearable green palette. The colors are super nice. It's the classic Colourpop formula. I haven't had any issues with it, but you have some like neutral colors. The greens are not like super bright. It's something that if you combine, for example, the browns with some of these greens, you can get a pretty neutral look, and that is something that I really enjoy. Also, I like the shimmers. I would say these are some of my favorite green wearable shimmers that I have. So yeah, happy to have it. And in number 15, we're already in the top 15. We have my Lilac You A Lot palette, again from Colourpop. I have a lot of Colourpop in my collection, and a lot of Colourpop palettes are my favorites, so I'm not surprised. But this is a monochromatic lilac palette, and this is something that I really wanted, because I have the It's My Pleasure palette, again from Colourpop, that is a monochromatic purple palette, but this one leans way more lighter because are lilacs, and I really like it, to be honest. It can be a little bit too monochromatic because most of the shades are pretty light. Well, it's lilac, so I'm not surprised. That was what I was hoping for. But I will say that one of my issues with this palette is the fact that I feel like the shimmers that they're over here, they like a base pigment. Sometimes I feel like they work better as a topper than a shimmer by itself. So yeah, I would have preferred the formula to be a little bit different, but I enjoy it. I really like it, and purples, lilac, pinks are my favorite colors to wear on my collection. Okay, in number 14, I have my Mercury Retrograde palette, and I don't know how I feel about this palette because there are some palettes that as soon as you see them, you know that they're your cup of tea, that you need them. But I remember when this palette was released, and I was indifferent about it. But I don't know, I saw so many people talking about this palette, the Huda Beauty formula, that I really wanted to try it. And when Huda Beauty was having the sale, the one that I mentioned, I decided to place my first order to Huda Beauty, and I don't regret it. But I wouldn't say I was hoping to like more this palette because I always have feel weird about this color story, but we have to admit that it's beautiful. It's just that I'm not sure if it's my cup of tea. I feel like these more teal, blue, greenish colors over here threw me off. But out of that, I will say this is pretty much, yeah, I would say that these are the issues for me. And these colors probably I will never wear once I used this one over here, and to be honest, I didn't love it. But yeah, this is a beautiful palette, but I have a complaint. If you see this color over here, you will say that it's a cool neutral taupe, a brown, a taupey color, but when you apply it on your eyes, it looks purple, completely purple, a neutral purple, but purple with a little bit of pink. And when I see it on the pan, I'm not expecting that. Yeah, that really, I don't know. I don't love that palette, and I will say that's the reason why. Moving on with number 13, I have my It's My Pleasure palette, and this was my favorite palette back in 2020 because it's amazing. It's a monochromatic purple palette. If you look at it, you can see that it's not that purple. You have some more pinky shades over here. This is more like a mauve, but it's a beautiful palette. The formula, it's amazing. The shimmers are, I'm surprised that this palette is not even higher on my collection. And I will say that one of the reasons why this palette is not higher is because of the packaging, because I feel like this packaging look cheaps. The name of the palette wears off. If you drop this palette, the shades fly all over your floor. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why this palette is not even higher, but I love it. It's one of my favorites. I'm surprised it's not in the top 5, but I decided to go with the point system, so I'm going to stay there. And I'm surprised because in number 12 I have a palette that to be completely honest, I prefer this palette to this one. This one is way better for me, but this one has more points, so I think it's the first time that I disagree with the point system, and I needed to tell you that. This is my Hip Dot palette in, no, how are you called? Cyan palette from Hip Dot. This palette, as soon as I saw it, I knew this was my cup of tea, but now that I have it, I'm not that sure. I was hoping for something that was a little bit more purple and neutral, but this one leans way more berry than purple. We have a lilac, but it's a little bit difficult to use in this palette because you don't have any purple shimmers in here. Maybe this one over here leans a little bit more purple, but more red purple than a cool a cool purple. Okay, I have said so many times purple that I cannot say it anymore. But yeah, it's a nice palette. I like the formula, but I don't love it. It's an okay palette for me. But yeah, somehow it ended up in the place number 12. I don't know how that happened, to be honest. We're almost in the top 10, but in number 11, I have my Warrior palette from Juvia's Place. This is an amazing neutral palette to do an everyday look. It's not something really unique or special on my collection, but I really like to have this palette on my collection because I feel like the shimmers in this palette are so creamy, so foiled. I really like the shimmer formula from Huda Beauty, no, from Juvia's Place. My only issue with it, and maybe if, I don't know, this palette could have go even higher. I don't know what I'm saying, I'm sorry, but I feel like I'm missing transition shades, because like, no, not even transition shades, I'm missing matte shades, because we only have three. Something more close to a cream, medium to dark, or at least on me it's pretty dark brown, and a really really dark brown. And I feel like I need something between these two shades, or replace this one over here with something more light. I don't know, some of the shimmers are kind of similar, so I feel like they could have changed one of the shimmers for another matte. And I know that since you have like the mid-tone, the dark one, and the lighter one, you can play around, mix them together, blend them together to get different shades of brown. But I prefer when the shades are already in the palette and I don't need to mix around. I don't mind blending colors, but combining them, I don't know, it's not something that I do too often. I prefer to use the colors as they come in the palette. So yeah. Okay, moving on, we have the top 10, and I'm not surprised, but it's kind of curious to me that this palette is this high, because this is one of my newer palettes on my collection, and I feel like I still need to play a lot around with this palette. This is my AVH Norvina palette volume 5, and thank God my Norvina palettes are high in the ranking, because these right now are my most expensive palettes in my collection, and it would have been a disaster for me if they wouldn't have been a good match for me. But this is a purple palette, the latest release from the Norvina like line from AVH. For some reason I want to call all the brands Huda Beauty right now, but yeah, this is, as I said, the purple palette, the latest one. And I already have gold pigment on my hands. It's such a stunning palette. I need to admit, when I saw the volume 4 of the Norvina palettes, they really called my attention, but I heard so many people saying that the volume 4 is not that good that I decided not to get it. But then when this winter for me, Huda Beauty, Anastasia revealed the volume 5 that was a purple palette, and as I said, I love purples, I love pink. I felt like I needed this palette, and if I got this palette I also needed the volume 4, so I got both of them. But yeah, I'm happy. I don't regret this purchase at all, even if it's my most expensive palette in my whole collection. It's a pretty complete purple palette. You have some lilacs, one that is way more bluish, to call it in a way, a cool tone lilac, and something that is more pinky. You have a lot of dark purples, but all of them are different. You have some neutrals, some more cool tone neutrals. I really like it, but I needed to like take off a point for the glitter, because yeah, I don't like glitters, and some brands insist on putting glitters in their palettes, and I don't enjoy that. Okay, in number 9, I have to admit it was a surprise for me, because again, this is a palette that when I saw Colourpop releasing this palette, I was like, yeah, looks pretty, but it's pretty similar to other palettes that they have already released. It's a color that I don't enjoy, or a shade that I don't enjoy, and I end up purchasing anyway because I heard so many people talking about this palette, and I didn't have that many cool tones in my collection. And that is my Dots Taupe palette from Colourpop. As I said, this is my favorite cool tone palette in my whole collection, and I feel like you can create so many different looks with it, with different undertone inside the cool tone, because you have, for example, this is way more like a brown neutral, a little bit cool but quite neutral. This color over here, it's pretty purpley. This over here, it's almost gray. This one over here, it has a little bit of pink. So you can play around so much, and you go from really light to really dark without getting into the cream colors and the black. This is a pretty dark brown, and the shimmers are pretty. I don't have any complaints with this palette. Okay, in number 8 we have a palette that I already mentioned in this video but I haven't ranked yet, and that is my Norvina Volume 4 palette from ABH. This palette, as I said before, as soon as I saw it, I wasn't able to stop thinking about it. At that time, the Norvina palettes were not available on my country yet, so there was no way for me to get them. But once they were available, first, they were super expensive. And second, I heard mixed reviews on this palette that this is not the best formula from ABH, and for that reason I wasn't really sure if I wanted this palette. For a long time I almost forgot about it. Here and there I heard some people saying that this is a palette that they were glad they didn't purchase, and I was like, maybe I missed a bullet. Like, how do you say that? But at the end I decided to purchase it after like a year and a half of thinking about it. I decided to go with it, and I don't regret it. I feel like, yeah, maybe it's not the best formula. Some of the shades are a little bit patchy and they're difficult to work with, and for that reason I didn't give this palette such a high like note or grade in the formula, because if you have such an expensive formula you expect this palette to work perfectly, and this doesn't work perfectly. But the color story is a 5 for me, a complete 5. Sadly this palette has 2 glitters, so that is not good for me, and for the point system I punish the palettes when they have glitters on it, but it's beautiful. Moving on to number 7, we have a palette that I haven't almost used, but when I rank it with the points, this is pretty high because the color story, it's amazing, the formula, it's amazing. My only issue with it is that it's not a color that I wear too often, and that is my High Tide palette from Colourpop. And even in camera, in the screen, the packaging, it's so freaking amazing, it's so beautiful. This is a teal palette, and these are one of my favorite kinds of colors, not to wear to be honest, but to look at them, they're amazing. I feel like this palette, for me, it's kind of the same with the Blue Moon palette. That is something that I like to look at, but it's not something that I really like to wear. But this is way more wearable for me than like purples. No, not purples, than blues. So for that reason, this palette is really high. It's a really good formula. The color story, it's amazing. I cannot stop looking at it because it's beautiful. And in camera, it looks even prettier. Oh my god, this palette is so pretty. The formula is amazing. Maybe the shimmers could be a little bit better. We only have 3 shimmers in this palette and I just realized that. But yeah, I love it. It's pretty. I want to use it this summer. I haven't used it yet because I had like the vision of using this palette when I'm at the beach. I haven't been in the beach yet, so yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be there this year. Hopefully I will, but who knows. Okay, in which number it is right now? In number 6 we have my Nude Mood palette from Colourpop, and again, I'm not surprised that this palette is high, but this is not one of my most used palette on my collection, because this is a neutral palette. It's an amazing neutral palette. The colors look amazing on my eyes. I feel like these go perfectly with my coloring. The shimmers are beautiful, the mattes are blendable. It's an amazing palette. I will say my only issues, this is the sister from the Blush Crush, and both of them has a super chalk shadow, and since I got it, it's a little bit dry, so a little bit hard to wear, but it's a beautiful palette. I will say that the only reason why I haven't used it even more, it's because I have a lot of neutral palettes on my collection. But I will say that if I needed to pick a neutral palette in my collection, or if I needed to pick 2, this one will be one of the ones that I chose. Okay, and we're finally at the top 5, and I need to admit that in number 5 there is a palette that I'm surprised. It's this high, but at the same time it's an amazing palette. I don't use it too often because it's pretty bright, but every time that I use it I'm surprised with the formula, with the like pigmentation of the shades. It's just amazing. And that is my City of Neon Lights from Root Cosmetics. This is a neon palette, and I feel like any neon color that you will need in your collection, you have it here. You have neon green, neon blue, neon purple, neon pink, neon yellow, neon orange. You have completely everything, and the formula, let me tell you, is just amazing. Oh, and you have a pretty good and bright white over here. I will say it's one of my best whites on my collection, one of the best at least. Yeah, it's an amazing palette. Every time that I want to do something really bright, really colorful, I don't do that kind of looks too often now, but I remember back at the beginning of the pandemic I was having a lot of fun with colors, and I was using a lot this palette and the Alicia palettes. And I will say this formula, it's way better than the Alicia formula. This is really pigmented and it can stain your eyes, so you're warned, but it's amazing. And I will say it's my best colorful palette in my whole collection. So yeah, I'm surprised because it's not something that I use too often, but at the same time I'm not surprised because the color story is amazing, the formula is amazing, and look at the packaging, it's really pretty. I really like it. And now we're finally with the last 4 palettes, and if I needed to hand pick my 4 favorite palettes, this will have been. So I'm not surprised that with the point system, these were my favorites. I'm not even surprised with the order. No, it just makes sense. Let's start with number 4, and that is my Blush Crush palette from Colourpop. This is a neutral pink palette, and for this season, for summer, for spring, it's such an amazing palette to wear because you can wear this to work, you can wear this to a date, you can wear this to go to the mall, to the supermarket, to whatever you want. And it's colorful, but it's neutral at the same time. I feel really beautiful when I use these shades. The formula is amazing. My only issue with this palette is the super chalk shadow over here, because same as the Nude Mood palette, it's pretty dry, pretty hard to wear. I have a pretty big tip on it. I feel like I could hit pan on it any second, and that will be my first pan in a Colourpop shade, but that's not the point. It's an amazing palette. I don't know if I will need to recommend a palette, a neutral but interesting palette to anyone. I'm pretty sure this palette will be the one that I will recommend. In number 3, not surprise again, I have my Zodiac palette from BH Cosmetics. This palette, this formula, this color story, it's just wow. I wouldn't have been surprised either if this palette would have been in place number 2, because definitely it's one of my top 3, maybe even top 2 palettes in my collection. But I will say that something that didn't benefit this palette was the packaging, because it's really bulky and it didn't need to be this bulky. Yeah, looks pretty, looks interesting. Every time that, for example, my boyfriend look at this palette, he's like, ooh, interesting, so pretty. But when you need to wear it, when you want to carry around this palette, it's a little bit difficult. It only has 24 shades and it's huge, it's heavy, has a mirror on it, by the way. But yeah, the color story, it's amazing. I feel so inspired every time that I look at it, especially in winter, in autumn. I feel like these colors are just amazing. The shimmers are one of the most foil shimmers in my whole collection. The mattes are really good, are not amazing like the shimmers, but are really good. So yeah, I'm really happy to have this palette. I don't regret purchasing this palette at all, and even I don't regret getting the Zodiac Love Signs, because for that palette I was able to get this palette. Basically, I didn't want to pay the whole shipping only for this one, so I feel like it was worth it for me. Okay, and finally we have the top 2 palettes. And I cannot believe I've been talking for like 40 minutes. I'm so tired, but these are the most exciting palettes. If you have been on my collection, probably you're not surprised. Maybe with the top 2, with the number 2, because I haven't mentioned this palette as much. But please, if you want to, stop this video right now and let me know which palette do you think are going to be in number 2 and which one is going to be in number 1. Okay, here we go. In number 2, we have my Naked Honey palette. This is another palette that when I saw Urban Decay releasing this palette, I remember that I was just getting into makeup and I was like, yeah, it's pretty, but it's nothing special. And yeah, the color story is not something that special. The formula is not like super amazing, but I feel like this is something that I could wear every day, and every time that I use it, I feel like these kind of shades go so well with my coloring, with my undertone, look amazing. The mattes are blendable, pigmented, but really like user friendly, to say it on a way. The shimmers, as I said, are not amazing. I've had way better shimmers in other palettes, but when you want to do a simple look for every day, not something like what I'm wearing today, this palette is just perfect. It's beautiful. I wasn't expecting to get this palette, but it was my like favorite naked palettes from the one that I have seen, so I decided to go with it when it was on sale, and I don't regret it at all. And in number 1, I'm pretty sure you can guess which palette it is, because for the whole year I was saying that this is my favorite palette, and I would have been surprised if this palette wouldn't have been my favorite. I'm surprised that it's not, oh no, yeah, I'm surprised that this palette doesn't have the 20 points, like the whole points, because it only has 19. But it's my Jackie Aina palette with Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is the palette that I bought for myself for my for my birthday. Since when I just got into makeup, everyone was talking about ABH. And I was like, I would like to try ABH, even if it was super expensive for me at the time. But all the palettes, the soft glam, the modern renaissance, the subculture, were not my kind of palettes. And I knew that if I got those palettes, I wouldn't get too much out of them. But then they released this palette that year. And that is the palette that I want to buy from ABH. But first, it was a limited edition, and at that time ABH was not available on my country, so I thought I was never going to be able to get this palette. Then ABH got in my country, but only like the classics, like the how do you call it, like the permanent line, I would say, not the limited editions. We're missing a lot of ABH products, to be honest. And this palette was not available, so I thought it's gone forever. ABH was already discontinuing this palette, but then I saw a girl selling this palette brand new, and I went for it. And I don't regret it at all. This is a stunning palette. The mattes are blendable, pigmented, the shimmers are foiled and beautiful. The only reason why this palette is not even higher, well, it can go even higher, but the only reason why this palette doesn't have the 20 points is for the color story, because I feel like there is 2 points that I don't like about it. First, the red, but I can live with that. But also these 2 shades over here look exactly the same on my eyes, so I needed to punish that in the point system. But yeah, it's an amazing palette and I love it. And now we have talked about all my 43 palettes. I feel like my voice hates me right now. But yeah, we're done. finally, it was a long video and a long process to create this ranking. I've been working in this ranking for like 3 months. It has been a mission. But yeah, that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please consider subscribing. I will love that. And let me know which are your favorite palettes in your collection, maybe your favorite one or the top 3. I would love to know. But yeah, that's everything for today, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Bye.